Hello and welcome to the Droid and Dragon Cantina, a podcast highlighting independent science fiction and fantasy authors. Our guest this week is Jason Degray, who is the author of Those Left Behind. In this episode, we talked about some of the big ideas behind science fiction and the rise of artificial intelligence in real life. Welcome to the show, Mr. Jason Degray.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Brandon. I'm excited to be here.
So tell the people, what's your latest book or your books that you've got out there right now?
Okay, right. Well, my latest book is called Those Left Behind. And this was kind of a passion project that I've been working back and forth on for years. And, there's even some lore behind, the actual manuscript itself. But the book is a space western with a little bit of a weird twist, because most of what I write has, that kind of weird twist. I can't just do anything, by the book. I can't just take any, genre and say, okay, I'm going to write a cyberpunk novel like I did with my previous book, Eve. No, I've got to twist it and filter it through my own warped and overactive imagination and come up with something just a little off center from what the genre should be. And so this is kind of what I did with, Those Left Behind. And so, this book is set in a solar system that has become a colony of planets. And there were 5 colonies, but the 4 of them were cut off, thousands of years ago by this abrupt entrance of this rogue planet into the solar system that destroyed some of the colonies and rained down debris on the main colony of this book where the story takes place, which is called Quad. And in doing that, it was pretty apocalyptic, and Quad is now mostly desert, and it's a dying planet, and it's struggling to survive. And the players in the book are all trying to figure out the best way to keep Quad surviving. And so that's kind of where the overarching clash are these, all of these different elements fighting over how they think the future should be. And and then you have the main characters going on and doing the little what's the word here? I guess quests or missions and things like this for all of these big time elite guys. And they are, coming face to face with themselves and, the weirdness that's happening around Quad at the time, because when the novel starts, we're 2,000 years from what they call the sky falling, this cataclysmic event. And things are starting to get weird again. And so, they are trying to, help Quad survive. But, like I said, things are getting weird and the animals aren't acting right and the stars look wrong, and things like this. Nobody really knows what's going on. And so they're trying to get their stuff done in the midst of this, encroaching weirdness, on the planet itself.
Yeah. So we generally, when people talk about writers, there's like the two main categories, though. I would argue there's a third that there's the 2 big camps are like the plotters and the pantsers. So which camp do you think you fall into? I've come to embrace, there's the third camp called the plantsters, which they do a little planning and a little plotting, and then they kind of give themselves room to play.
Well, I think that's kind of how I do it. My first draft is always analog. I always type it out on a typewriter or write it in notebooks and things like this, just to get my ideas out. And then I will start typing it up into, the computer, and then start the editing phase where I, stop and consider the plot holes, or what does this character need, and that type of stuff as I'm typing it up into the computer. And so that would be kind of, I guess, like my plotting phase where, after I get that, like I said, that initial idea out, then I'm building out that idea, into something that, is a book. And so, it is kind of a two-step process, but I cannot, stress enough for me anyway, the importance of that process of that initial draft of just getting that idea out. This is the story that I want to write. Here's the main points of it. And, what do I need in order to turn this into a book now? And so, I guess I do fall into that third category. Yeah.
So I'm curious, when it comes to the world building, how much of that are you doing? Were you doing any of that at all in advance? Like just getting ideas? Because if you're, like a lot of like anybody that's watching kind of like any degree of like sci-fi or even fantasy, that's that kind of thing that both have in common. There's that usually like you have to kind of build out a very extensive world for these characters to play in. Like how much of that were you doing that like at all before the story, or are you kind of getting into the story and then having to build out the world accordingly?
Well, no, I take what I like to call the Michael Moorcock approach to that. I'd read years ago at some interview that he had done in some magazine, and the interviewer was asking, one of the questions was, how did you build this Elric world? You built out this world, and it's so rich, and so much going on, and all of this type of stuff. How did you do that? And he's like, I didn't. So I was writing the story, and then I needed something, and then so I put it in. And so, that's kind of how I approach, world building, because to me, you can go too far one way or the other. And, going too deep into world building, and then you have this, really fleshed out world, but no story. And so, part of that is, part of, I think the joy of, not having to have every little thing hammered out is that, it leaves you with a little bit of mystery, to your own world and things like that. And so you have a little bit of room to say, no, I want this character to be like this or do this, here in this situation, in this place. But, and if you've gone too far the other way and you just have this fleshed out world, but now you are forcing the characters, to go by your world outline. And the story isn't about the world, right? The story is about your characters and about how they're acting and reacting to what's going on in the world around them. And so I really think that it's important to have that leeway, have that room for you as an author to work around, as you're writing it out. And so whenever I started this, I had an idea. Okay, I have this set of planetary colonies. Here's Quad. This is where the story is going to take place. It got the brunt of this cataclysmic event because it's right next to this rogue planet that busted into the system. And, I think it would have been destroyed most of the time, and it's dying slowly ever since then. And there's probably, very few locations, that are struggling to, hold on. And so, that's kind of how I went about it. And then, so whenever I was, writing the story, I'd be like, okay, we're in Quad City. All right. What does that look like? And I would build it as I went. And I write most of my books like that.
So at what point did you get the writing bug? Like, did you do it very young, or is it kind of something that happened later in life?
No, it was very young. I started trying to write my first book when I was 12 years old. And, this idea that I'd come up with when me and my group of friends were playing Dungeons and Dragons. And I would, oh, yeah, this would be cool with these characters here and these characters doing that. And so I sat down with a, ream of loose leaf notebook paper and started writing it out, and I got 3 or 4 chapters in and moved on to other things. But, after that, I was always writing short stories. Me and a friend of mine in middle school even were doing comics. And, I was writing them and he was illustrating them. And, and so this is something that has really followed me throughout my life. It's something that has always been a part of who I am. And so, that's been my journey.
Yeah. So at what point did you get your first full novel or book done?
That was in around 2007, 2008, right at the beginning of this self-publishing era. And so, it was something, those were wild times in the publishing industry, let me tell you. And so I was putting out my first novel right around then. And it was crazy because, the big five back then, it was five publishing houses, were really starting to batten down the hatches and, ramping up the gatekeeping and things like that, trying to prepare for the onslaught that was going to be the self-publishing world. And so trying to get in through one of those avenues was even more difficult. You
already answered what would have been my next question. So it sounds like you did actually try to go like the traditional route up front.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, especially back then, whenever this market was just getting off the ground, I mean, we would be discouraged from self-publishing across the board. And I mean, even so far as, like we had an agent come speak at our writing group that I was in at that time. The agent basically told us that if we self-published anything, we would never get a traditional publishing contract. We would never even be looked at.
Right, because I remember back when it first started to become a thing, there was like a real stigma around it. I don't know how much of that was just from like, of course, the big publishing houses maybe helping kind of, get spread that out there. But it was like, there was originally, like when I remember people started self-publishing books, it was almost that kind of thing, like, oh, you're only here because you can't go get in anywhere else. So like it was almost, I don't want to say like it's almost like there'd be a little bit of shame that people would try to throw on people. But we've seen through the years, especially like up until now, where it's kind of like it's been growing and growing and growing to where now a lot of the new authors I've found out a lot of them are self-published.
Right. Absolutely. And the publishing industry has even shifted now, as far as that is concerned, and hybrid publishing is now a thing, to where, the big companies and agents and stuff like that now are looking at, your self-publishing journey, your independent publishing journey, the platform and the audience that you've built before they'll even, reach out and say, oh yeah, send me your manuscript. I'm interested in reading the full thing. No, they're going to, all the work that you've already done first to see how they can cash in on that. And so,
I mean, at this point, you've done like half their work for them. You've already been like your own kind of like, been your own marketing department and all that. You've done the going out on TikTok doing a show like this where you kind of come and promote yourself. Again, that's like, you've probably saved them hiring like 3 different employees.
Right. Exactly. And, and even back then, the publishing companies were very adamant, very open with the fact that, like, look, you're a new author and, you're going to be doing most of your marketing and promotion anyway. And so, we'll get your book ready. We'll publish it. We'll put it out there. But, selling it and making a name for yourself, that's still on you. And so, whenever I found this out, and the conclusion I came to was then I might as well just do it. And so that started, getting my first novel published, which was kind of a young adult fantasy adventure, heavy on the satire, via Gulliver's Travels, type of stuff. And, I commissioned the artist and got the illustrations and learned how to format the book, because back then there was no book wizards, right? You had to format the file, margins and all, in Word before you could submit it to, the publishing, because, back then, when there were all these, Ex Libris and Author House and, and all of these people, these self-publishing companies been like, yeah, we'll publish your book for you. It's only $5,000 and, we'll do it all. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm a starving artist. Absolutely not. And so, I'm going to learn this myself. And so, I went and did that. It's really helped. I mean, that this is something that if you are, starting your independent publishing journey, this is something that you need to actually focus on. I mean, because even if you're outsourcing and being like, well, yeah, I'm going to have this book lay out, this person lay out my book or this person designed the cover. You need to already have an eye for that. And you already need to know what you're looking for as far as that's concerned. So you need to have some experience with that, in itself, to being like, no, these pages look a little wonky, or I don't like that font, or, that type of thing. You already need to have an idea of, how it should look and what it should be. And so, that's something that's, outside all of that marketing and promotion stuff is, learn how to craft a book, learn what a good book looks like and how you want it to be, and, go forward with that vision. And it helps immensely.
So where were you going back when you're starting to learn all this stuff? What were the resources that you were using to kind of get over that learning curve?
I was looking at books that I really liked. And so at the time it was, I was really into Pulp Fiction. And so Degray had just re-released the Conan novels, and they were all like illustrated and things like that and put together. And so, that was a big inspiration for me, where, those Degray books, and then, the Philip K. Dick series, that, I can't remember who put those out, but we're re-releasing a bunch of his books, with cover design and, and layout and things like this that I was really attracted to. And so, those were the ones that, I was really looking at, as far as layout and design goes. But I did want something with, to include illustrations, because like I said, this was a, older readers / young adult novel, thing. So, the Degray books with the Robert E. Howard stuff specifically, because they included, little, half-page illustrations and things like that going forward. So that's really what I went to.
So what were some of those early books that, kind of helped you get your style, or just were inspirations for what you write?
Oh, okay. Okay. Like authors.
Your influences are, your authors.
Yeah. Well, like I said, obviously Robert E. Howard, and all of the pulp writers. I really think that, Pulp Fiction is fascinating, because that was a time when I think that America as a literary entity was really starting to find its voice. And Pulp Fiction, and, and that type of stuff was one of those voices that was really like focusing on that like dynamic storytelling, and these like larger than life characters that you just fell in love with, and they were pushing it out. And fascinating, enough, back then, most of these people were independently published authors. They had their own newsletters and stuff like that they were writing and publishing each other's stories in and things, at that time. And that was where a lot of these guys, cut their teeth and developed their style and developed their voices. I mean, so it was very much an independent movement. And so, I love it for that. And so, that's a big one for me. And another one, like I said, is Philip K. Dick, because I love the way that, he takes stories and turns them around on his head, because he was really interested in finding, the answers to the questions, what is reality and what does it mean to be human? And so all of his stories are kind of filtered through this lens. And he was the first, one of the first sci-fi authors to take that storytelling down to that a common man level, if you were that blue collar level, because before that in earlier sci-fi books, it was all about space captains and, and this type of stuff. But Philip K. Dick started writing it. No, this dude makes jewelry. And, and he's in this weird
sci-fi.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Not always just the upper echelons of societies, like the barons and the dukes, or the spaceship, the military, captain, top of the top ranks.
Right. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Exactly. And he was one of the first authors to be like, no, let's bring that down a notch. Let's bring that down to the real. And to me, that just like brings that writing alive. And, for me, and you could really see, the humanity in these characters as they're struggling to find out what humanity is. And so it's, brilliantly done, and something that, like I said, still inspires me to this day.
Yeah, Philip K. Dick. Yeah, it's funny. Like I kind of feel like he probably would be one of these guys nowadays that would probably think we were living in a simulation. Like I know that wasn't. I don't think that idea was quite out there when he was doing his thing. But I could totally see him being on board with that nowadays.
Oh no, he kind of pioneered that idea,
right? Thank you because it's like he was already kind of like. I feel like he was he was right up against the edge of it before he passed away. But you could tell like his brain was already going there, and then someone else just kind of picked up the ball and ran with it to where now you've got people saying we're living in the Matrix and
right, yeah, because he absolutely thought right up before he died that we were living in a fake timeline. Yeah. And that none of this was real, and it was talking adamantly about that. And there's one really great talk that he did that you can find online. I think it's the Metz France talk that he gave, where he really starts getting into it. And you're like, oh yeah, you were really ahead of the curve on this,
right.
buddy.
He was, yeah. It's like he wasn't there, but he was. You could tell he was clearly pointed in that direction. Yeah, he just kind of didn't quite live long enough for that to kind of like to kind of connect those threads. But yeah, you could definitely go back and look at his work, and you're like, he was right there.
Yeah, and then check out his exegesis, and he will even tie in all of his work for you because he's
Well, even the whole do androids dream of electric sheep, which now everybody knows is Blade Runner. I mean, that still has my God, that movie became one of the most influential sci-fi films of all time. But that story still, you can see that like the seeds of it, are still kind of being spread around today.
Yeah, absolutely, and the interesting thing is with Blade Runner, like Philip K. Dick got to see a little bit of the early edits before he died. He got to sit in on one, and he actually said that they got his vision right, that this was exactly how he envisioned the world, as he was writing the story, and so we don't know really what he thought about the movie itself because he died shortly after that. But yeah, I mean, it really did like line up with his vision, and I really do consider him, as far as cyberpunk and stuff like that goes, he's one of the founding fathers of cyberpunk.
Proto cyberpunk, if you want to get it definitely is one when you look back at it. Like he was, it's kind of like he was definitely, like he was knocking on a very particular door, or maybe like he was on the verge of kind of inventing, like creating a genre that didn't quite exist yet.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if he would have, lived a little bit longer, that he would have, really started laying some groundwork for that. But yeah, I mean, outside of William Gibson, I really do consider, Philip K. Dick one of the founding fathers, because, just that was where he was writing, and those were the worlds that he was seeing. And then, not Philip K. Dick, William Gibson really picked up on that common man's, blue collar sci-fi type of thing, and ran with it with cyberpunk, with the high tech and low life, trope and theme and things like this. I mean, and so I really do think that, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to borrow that. That was a great idea. And, and let's run with it. So, I mean, absolutely. That's, he was definitely seeding, the future of an entire genre.
It reminds, what's that quote? Like he's planting seeds, planting trees under whose shade he would never sit. Right. We all know who is that. That's kind of the thing I like about sci-fi, is watching people kind of build on the ideas through from one generation to the next. I mean, like, right. How many stories do we have that are really kind of like takeoffs on like Frankenstein, right? Or the granddaddy, of them all, Dune, and like, Jesus, that's like half of Star Wars came from that one.
Right. And the other half was samurai movies.
And was it Foundation by Isaac Asimov? Like there's some pretty serious chunks of that. Yeah. It's like Frank Herbert, Akira Kurosawa, and Isaac Asimov.
Yeah.
Throw them in the blender. Star Wars.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. But that's kind of you know, I think especially now, in this world where there really is nothing new under the sun, there's no new ideas, right? We really only have, a handful of plot lines to begin with. There's only like 6 plot lines,
Yeah.
for all the stories ever written. And so, what we really have to do is really take all of that stuff that's out there, and the stuff that inspires us, the stuff that that moves us, that leaves an impression on us, and put it in that blender. But that blender has to be our unique perspective. And
Well, yeah, you talked about it right at the top. Like you got to put, like I always tell people, like just because that story's been done, like no one's done your version of it.
Right.
And you got to put like that spin that only you can put on it. Like I feel like that's the interesting thing, is because like maybe there's something from your experience that will add something that's just quirky enough or just unique enough to where now suddenly it'll feel like fresh and new again.
Right. Exactly, because that's where the uniqueness comes, is through each of our individual experiences, and and how we take this material and apply it to that, and so, that's nothing to be ashamed of, I think at this point. And then, like we just said, in the case of Star Wars, I mean, that became a pop culture phenomenon. I mean, still to this day, people get very passionate about that stuff, and are rolling with it. I mean, and so, that is how it's done. And so, trying to rack your brain to think of something original, some new angle, some, this or that. I mean, you could do that forever and never get a word down on paper. I mean, so, take what you have and filter it through your experience. What message are you trying to get across to people? And how are you going to tell the story that conveys that message?
Yeah, and there's no shortage of stuff out there, especially I think when the last 20 years or so, just how the leaps and bounds that like technology has made. I mean, it's funny. I was talking about this with another author, like things that like even 10 years ago seemed far fetched now are starting to seem like a reality. Like some of the like, so like self-driving cars, or, they're working on flying cars now, which is a little scary considering how people drive on the ground. But I mean,
Right.
but I mean, like, yeah, it's already like like you can see some of those, like you go follow any like the science, journals and stuff online, just kind of seeing what robots can do now. And then of course, like AI is, emerging, it's starting to get out there now where it can already kind of, we were just joking about like, it hasn't quite cracked art yet. I mean, it can make art, but it's not really good art. But you kind of just feel like all the other stuff you can do with it, it's just, you can already kind of feel it growing so much faster that, now it's suddenly where, you get to the whole, like, Skynet is self-aware, and you feel like we're probably a lot closer than any of us really want to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the crazy thing is that, there's no stopping it at this point. And so I wonder if it's people are going to split and go one of two ways. The people that adopt all of this, stuff that's coming, and then the people that, look at it and say, I don't like that. I want to be human, and, kind of step away from that. Because, it's interesting that, like, right around this time that all of this crazy technology, is coming out, and all these weird advancements are coming in. There is this return to, these physical media. There's a return to, analog, type of life, where people are using typewriters instead of computers. And
there's stories even that of like some of the young kids, younger Gen Z, Gen Alpha, are starting to go back to like old school photography, like, and not using their phones.
Right. Exactly. And so, there's already this weird like polarity that's emerging out of all of this. And so, I wonder if that's going to be the case. I've been hearing it said frequently over the past few months since this AI stuff really started going out that the internet is dead, that now it's just going to be all bots and things like that. And I do believe that after a point that's going to be probably true. I mean, so, as an author, if you consider things like Kindle Unlimited, right? I mean, so that's going to become an AI slop farm. And
yeah,
and that's what it's going to be. I mean,
somebody made a great point one time, and I use this sage from time. As soon as someone said, you're just like, yes, of course that. And it's like, why would I want to read anything that someone couldn't be bothered to write?
Right. But people will do it. Because
I mean, it's like, I know it's going to, like, the rational, like, cold-blooded pragmatist part of my brain. I was like, I know it's going to be done. I know at some point there's going to be like an explosion of AI generated, art, music, whatever, it'll just become a part of our life. And it'll be like we'll get to a point where we'll never, only like a few of us of a certain age will remember what life was like without it.
Right.
I also was thinking the other day, because I was, we were talking just before we got on, someone did played me an AI made song, but it got me to thinking, like, there's a part of me that almost thinks that, like, when it gets prevalent enough, there'll be like this kind of rebellion against it, that, like, I feel like maybe it'll be the kind of thing that will elevate art, and it, like, almost just the backlash, you'll get some really good stuff, because then people start thinking, like, what is it that makes art human, and how can we do more of that? And then, I'm hoping that the backlash will bring something even better.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. That will be, in my mind, the catalyst for, the resurgence of, that human driven art, and people will, hopefully go and start seeking that out again. And, whereas now I don't think they are, because there's just too much out there. And, and so, that once we cross that threshold, then having something created, human made, will be something truly unique. And, people will start trying to seek that out again. And it'll be a type of, renaissance, I hope.
Maybe it'll get people, instead of, because with the virtual space gets flooded with that kind of generic stuff, that maybe people start going again. You'll start, maybe you'll see like a resurgence in like museums and art galleries and like public spaces where authors are doing readings, and like people will say, hey, let's go. The virtual world is filled with trash right now. Let's go get back to the real world.
Right. And then, like, so our role then in that would be to use the virtual world to point people towards the real. And that's a beautiful thing.
Outstanding. Yeah, I'm with that, man. So, well, we've about hit the half hour. Tell the people where they can find you online if they want to learn more about your books, or just, at you and learn more.
Sure. I am on Facebook, at Jason Degray Author. That's my Facebook page, and on Instagram at The Ruined Man, and Substack at Lefty Sinister.
You have like a author website that just on its own, or is it all through social?
No, I am reworking that, actually. So yeah, it's down right now.
Okay, well, we'll put a link to when it comes back up, so if people, but now that we've got all the socials, so hopefully they'll follow you and they'll know when that happens. So.
All right, great. Thank you.
All right, well, thanks for coming out, man. We'll be on the lookout for all your stuff out there.
All right, thank you, Brandon, and thanks for having me.
That will be all for this episode. This podcast has been a Carcutta Media production. To learn more about this show or other podcasts, visit carcuttamedia.com/podcasts, or follow us on social media at Carcutta Media. This recording, or any portion thereof, may not be reproduced or used in any manner whatsoever without the express written permission of the publisher, except for use of brief quotations in a review. Copyright 2025 by Carcutta Media. All rights reserved.